Okay, so obviously I did not make it all in one video to get all 3 lessons. Let's finish completing this square. In number 2, x squared minus 3x minus 18 equals 0. Again, if I try to factor this, I know that -6 and +3 works, and I could indeed write this as x minus 6 times x plus 3 equals 0, and then solve each of those for 0. But for our purposes today, we're going to complete the square. All right, so to complete the square, I first have to add 18 to the other side. And when I do, I get x squared minus 3x plus something equals 18 plus something. All right, to go ahead and complete the square on the left, I take b, which is -3, and I take half of that. So I now have -3 halves, and I square it. -3 times -3 is +9, and 2 times 2 is 4. So when I square it, I get 9/4. That is what I'm adding to both sides, okay? So it gets a little tricky when you're dealing with adding fractions or subtracting fractions. So I have created a perfect square trinomial on this side. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 9/4 is 3 halves. The sign that goes in between is subtraction because that linear term has a subtraction in front of the 3. So I square that. Equals 18 over 1 plus 9 over 4. I now have to get a common denominator on the right. I'm going to multiply both sides by 4 over 4. Okay. When I do that, I get x minus 3 halves squared equals 18 times 4 is 72/4 plus 9/4, and 72/4 plus 9/4 is 81/4 equals x minus 3 halves, and I square it. To undo something squared, I take the square root, and it's plus or minus. So I get x minus 3 halves equals the square root of 81 is 9. The square root of 4 is 2. So I get plus or minus 2 halves, or 9 halves. So now I'm going to get x by itself by adding 3 halves. And when I add 3 halves, I get x equals, it looks like 3 halves plus or minus 9 halves. So 3 plus 9, these have the same denominator, so I can add the numerator. It's 12 over 2, or 6. And 3 minus 9 is -6 over 2, or -3. And again, this is one that would have been factorable. So that would be the way to go in that situation. All right, let's quickly look at the back side. It says when the quadratic you're solving has an a value other than 1, you must divide the entire equation by the value of a before you complete the square. All right, so let's look at this and see what it's talking about. So 6n squared minus 10n plus 4 equals 0. Do you see how this has a coefficient that is not 1 in front of it? You cannot complete the square unless that has a 1 in front of it. So you have to go through and divide every single thing by 6. So I get n squared minus 10/6 is equivalent to 5/3. And 4/6 is equivalent to 2/3, and 0 divided by anything is 0. I'm going to subtract the 2/3, and when I do that, I get n squared minus 5/3 n plus something equals -2/3 plus something. Now I have to complete the square. I take my b, which is -5/3, and I take half of that. When I take half of that, that's -5/3 divided by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2. And I get -5 over 6, but now I have to square it. -5 times -5 is +25, and 6 times 6 is 36. So I'm adding, 25/36 to both sides. I have completed the square. I created a perfect square trinomial on the left. So now I'm going to write it as the square of a binomial. The square root of n squared is n. The square root of 25/36 is 5/6. I keep the operation being subtraction. Now I have -2/3 plus 25/36. Okay. I need a common denominator. I will multiply this by 12 over 12. So I get n minus 5/6, that squared, equals negative 24/6, 36, plus 25, 36. Negative 24 plus 25 is 1/36, and I have n minus 5/6. All of that squared. To undo something that's squared, I take the square root, and it's going to be plus or minus. So I get n minus 5/6, because taking the square root of something squared takes that off, equals the square root of 1 is 1, the square root of 36 is 6, and that's plus or minus. To get n by itself, I will add 5/6. So I get n equals 5/6 plus or minus 1/6. 5 plus 1 is 6, so 6/6 is 1. 5 minus 1, or n equals 4/6, which is 2/3. And that's your solution. Okay, so let me tell you what I want you to try. Here's the first one you're going to try. It's c squared plus 18c minus 175 equals 0. You should get c equals negative 25 or 7. In number 2, you're going to get y squared plus 8y equals 10. Notice they already have c moved to the right side, so you're just going to be completing the square. You've already had step 1 done there. Your answer will be y equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 26. And then I want you to try one like we just did, where the coefficient in front of a is greater than 1. 4a squared plus 8a equals 27. Notice again, your c is already moved to the other side. When you solve this, you should get a equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 31 over 2. Okay. All right, so try those. I'm going to stop because we're going to move to quadratic formula next. So the last method we're going to talk about in this unit is the quadratic formula. And many of you have heard and used the quadratic formula before. This is basically a formula that you are just substituting values in and solving as you go. Okay, so this is just a matter of making sure you're identifying your A, B, and C correctly and filling it in. This works on any quadratic. Okay, again, this one can be tedious. This one also can be one where a lot of errors are made, so you really need to be careful. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, we're going to practice together too, and then I'm going to let you try too. The first one, x squared plus 4x minus 5 equals 0. A good thing to know about these is you do want to make sure that these are in standard form, meaning set equal to 0 before you identify your A, B, and C. A is always what's in front of the quadratic. In this case, it's a 1. B is what's in front of the linear, which is a 4. And C is our constant term. I take the formula, x equals the opposite of b. If b is 4, it's negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, or 4 squared, minus 4 times a is 1 and c is negative 5, all over 2 times a, or 1. Now we go ahead and we just simplify and solve. So we get x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared is 16. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Times negative 5 becomes plus 20. Over 2 times 1 is 2. So I get x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 36 all over 2. I go to the radical and I try to simplify. If it's a perfect square, which it is, you write it. If it's not, you look for any perfect square factors. So I get negative 4 plus or minus 6 over 2. And then I simplify it. Negative 4 plus 6 over 2, or negative 4 minus 6 over 2. So this becomes 2 over 2, and this becomes negative 10 over 2. So x equals 1 or negative 5, and that's all you do. All right, Let's look at another one together. Number 2, 3y squared equals 6y minus 1. Okay, so 3y squared equals 6y minus 1. Again, I don't have this in standard form. I'm going to move my 6y and my 1. So I get 3y squared minus 6y plus 1 equals 0. So remember, I'm moving it all over here. A, what's my A is 3. What's my B? Negative 6. What's my C? 1. My formula is x equals the opposite of B. If B is negative, it becomes positive. Plus or minus the square root of B. B is negative 6. I'm squaring it. Minus 4 times A is 3 times C is 1. All over 2 times A, which is 3. So I get 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 12, because negative 4 times 3 is negative 12 times 1 is negative 12. All over 2 times 3 is 6. X equals 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 12 is 24, all over 6. 24 is not a perfect square, but there is a perfect square factor. Remember, this is like 4 times 6, and 4 is a perfect square, so I'm going to take that out. So that becomes 2 square root of 6 over 6. Now, I can do some simplifying because 6, 2, and 6 all share a common factor of 2. I'm going to simplify this by 2. So this becomes 3, this becomes 3, and that becomes a 1. So this is 3 plus or minus the square root of 6 over 3. Okay, and you can leave it like that, or you can expand it out and do 3 plus the square root of 6 over 3 and 3 minus the square root of 6 over 3. These are the ones I want you to try. 3x squared plus x minus 4 equals 0. You should get x equals 1 or negative 4/3. And n squared minus 6n minus 1 equals 0. You should get 3 plus or minus the square root of 10. Okay, so I have about 2.5 minutes just to tell you what I've done. So these are the videos. Again, this is all optional. This is just extra practice if you want it. If you go to our class page under topics, you will find a Unit 12 folder where I have put the homework assignments for you to do. I'm also going to put the answers. They'll all be posted in one download, though, the answers. So feel free to do these, practice them. Reach out to me if you want. I can't guarantee I'm going to look at my messages every day, but if you don't hear from me after a day or two, shoot me another one because I'd be happy to go over any of this with you. Have a great summer, y'all. I already miss you. And yes, just reach out to me if you need anything. Talk to you soon.